Good morning, everyone. My name is Merle Massey. I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research at the University of Saskatchewan. And we're coming to you today. It is June 2020, June 24th, 2020. And today our session is on how to write a journal article. And with us today, we have two presenters. We have Liv Marken from the University of Saskatchewan Library and Ghassan Al-Yassin, who has been the chief editor of USURJ, our University of Saskatchewan undergraduate research journal. And with that, I will hand it over to Liv and Ghassan.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I have a new mic. I just want to make sure all's good. Okay. Awesome. Let's do this. So I'll just start sharing content and make sure everything is good. So now you can see my screen, right? I'll take that as a yes because I have no idea. I can't see anyone. All right.
Yes, we can. It looks great.
Awesome.
And it looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so hi, my name is Ghassan. I am the graduate editor-in-chief of the University of Saskatchewan Undergraduate Research Journal. I am doing an MD and a PhD. I love science so much. I love academia. I love doing research. So I love talking about it too. So without further ado, the purpose of today's session is to talk about the publication process, the different steps of the publication process, but also hopefully with our experience, maybe we can give you some tips that can help you survive the publication process. And Liv has a lot of experience with writing help. So she has a lot of stuff, and like the second half of this session will all be her tips on writing and whatnot. So hopefully this will be very helpful for you to kind of, now that you've done hopefully the research and survived the zombie apocalypse that we have going on right now that you can write and publish. So let's get this done. So the publication process has different steps, obviously. So it starts from picking the journal to all the way to publishing, and it goes through picking the journal, actually submitting the peer review. I have it here underlined and in red because that's the scariest part, and then some other stuff I will briefly discuss, but you don't have to worry too much about it because this is mostly done by the journal you're dealing with. You don't have to do a lot of work. So I call it the fun stuff. Well, everything is fun, but it's all relative. Anywho, all right, so picking the right journal. Before I start, I have to say this. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to everyone who works with you on a project to publish your work in the best journal you can pick. Why do I say that? Because reputation of the journal matters. Reputable journal, if you publish your work in a reputable journal, then it's more likely that people will read your work. So if you want people to see your work, you want to pick the best journal out there. So the first step is picking the scope, or like choosing a journal that has the appropriate scope. So for example, here I have Journal of Immunology. Why? Because I'm an immunologist, and the Journal of Immunology is one of my favorite journals. That's where I work. So I'm not sure if this will work. Let's give it a shot. So if I click here, it works. Can you see the screen? All good? I'll take that as a yes. Okay.
Yes, we're great.
Okay, good. I got a yes. Nice. Cool. Whoever messaged me, keep doing that. Thank you. All right, so this is what a journal website would look like, and then they all have it very easy for you. Info, let's click about the journal, and you see here journal scope and content. You just click on it, and you have all the details that you need. Very simple. Okay, so make sure you read that first, because it will determine what kind of audience you will be dealing with, and also whether or not this journal will be suitable for you. So that now that we're done with the scope, the other part is the quality of the journal. And there are different ways to assess the quality of the journal, you will probably have heard of the impact factor. There are many different ways to calculate the impact factor, but generally, or the easiest way to think about it is how many times articles in their journal have been cited over a certain period of time. And the more the citations, obviously, then the higher the impact factor, which means people are reading articles published in that journal. So if you publish there, your work will more likely to be read by someone out there. So there is the impact. Not every journal has an impact factor, and I'm not going to get into that. I think you might have had a discussion on impact factor or journal citation reports, and not every journal has it, especially if you're not doing social sciences or natural or health sciences. So if you don't have an impact factor to use, then go with the publisher's reputation. So for example, university presses like Oxford University Press, these kind of things, that you can use that to assess the quality of the publication or the quality of the publisher, or the reputation of the publisher. And the last one, and probably the most common one, is the reputation of the journal itself, because you can just talk to your colleagues, other graduate students in the research units you're working in, and they will tell you, oh, we usually publish in Nature, we usually publish in the Journal of Immunology, these kind of things. And then that's how you know what to pick. So why is it important to go through all of this? Is because there are unfortunately, a lot of predatory publishers. And I think you've already had a session on that, but I'll just briefly touch on it. So there's what's called open access publication, which means these are, if you publish in an open access journal, anyone out there can read your work and they don't have to pay a subscription fee. But you have to pay when you publish. So that's a good business. You submit your work, you pay the journal makes money, your work gets published, everyone is happy, right? Well, this comes at a price sometimes, because the journals want to publish more, so they decrease the quality of the peer review, and you get more publications coming out, and they are making more money, and now we have bad science being published. You don't want to publish your work in a predatory journal. And I gave you these 3 links here. Give them a read. I think these slides will be made available to you. It's very, very easy read. Especially this link here. It's very nice. But I also have a summary in the next slide. So basically, things to look out for if you don't already have a journal in mind, or the journal that you already know of is maybe the standards are very different, or they have a different scope. So now you're looking for other journals. These things, you have to keep them in mind, or always pay attention to them. So for example, are there any publication costs? Even if there are some publication costs, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But then again, are they easy to find, or are they hidden? And all of a sudden they say, oh yeah, by the way, you have to pay $2,000 to get your article published. That's how you know that's maybe a predatory journal. Do they have a clear editorial policy, or do they have them listed on their website? For example, privacy policy, peer review policy, open access policy, all of these should be listed on their website. Can you easily contact them? Actually did that. I was contacted by a predatory publisher. I went to their website. The first article I clicked on its abstract, I found like 2 or 3 typos, which is completely unacceptable. So that's the abstract is probably the most common read part of any article. And if you already have typos there, then what else am I going to expect from the rest of the stuff? So that's how you know there's little quality control. And if I immediately lost respect for that journal, then I kind of already lost respect for most of the work there. There might be some good quality stuff, but I already given up. And imagine if you end up submitting there, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So be very, very, very careful with picking journals, especially if you're just going without a plan and now sometimes I do that actually. So I let's say I want to publish, but let's say I want to publish a long review, and the Journal of Immunology, when I look at their scope and look at their formats, they don't have a long review, they only have brief review, for example. So I have to look for other places. So when I Google list of immunology journals, and I have a whole bunch of lists, some of them are not good, even though they might be listed as like one of the top. You click on it and you realize they have a lot of sketchy stuff. So pay attention to these things. And I always bring this up because this is my favorite. So I told you I was contacted by a predatory publisher. So a long time ago, I published this article. Doesn't matter what it's about, okay? But if you really care, it was just me pointing out that there is some other scientist out there made a mistake. And I said, you know what? They made a mistake. Their conclusion is wrong. Yada, yada, yada. Doesn't matter. Anywho, I was contacted by these people. And if you pay attention, they got my name written like this, which is funny. Their website is HTTP, doesn't have S, which means it's not a secure website. They didn't bother spending $50 to make it secure. And they say here, it is their honor to invite me to launch a special issue on a topic of my choice. If anyone knows me, they would know this is a very dangerous thing to put so much power in my hand, because if you want me to launch a topic of my choice, well, how about predatory publishing? That sounds like a very interesting topic to talk about. But anyways, you get also spam emails, beautiful emails inviting you to a conference that you have to spend thousands of dollars on, and they say hailing in their citation. They spell your name incorrectly, and they give you a WhatsApp number that you should contact and all that stuff. So anyways, jokes aside, pay attention, be careful, publish in high quality journals, okay? So you've picked your journal, now it's time to submit. So typically, all journals have at least 3 things they will ask from you: a cover letter, the main file, the article, and then some other documents that it varies journal to journal. So, cover letter, what is it? The cover letter is a private communication between you and the editor of that journal who will be managing your submission. The purpose of the cover letter is for you to summarize your article so the editor knows what you're submitting. You also tell the editor why you think your article is suitable for publication in their journal, keeping the scope in mind, and why would the audience of that journal be interested in reading your work, and what original ideas does your work have? What new things are you bringing to the field? Okay. Some journals will also ask you to list reviewers that you think are appropriate, so it makes it easier for them to find appropriate reviewers. Sometimes you also list reviewers that you think might have conflict of interest to make sure the editors don't pick these reviewers. And then it's always nice to thank the editors for their taking the time to read your paper, making a decision, and considering it for submission. And I already said it's a private communication, so whatever you say in the cover letter will be between you and the editor. It won't go to the reviewers.
Ghassan,
Yes.
just to interrupt for just a second, is there any way that you can unsplit your screen? There, yeah.
What was happening?
I was only seeing half like just part of your, yeah, your screen was split in half.
Okay, I think I know what happened, but
There, great. Perfect. Thank you.
okay, good. Okay, since we stopped, I'm gonna exit this and let's see if we have any questions. Any quick questions? You can type them in the chat maybe.
Quiet crew, you can keep going. Ghassan, Ghassan, I've lost your audio. Can anyone else hear him?
I've you.
Okay. He's not muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Keep going.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know what's
That's
happening.
okay. These things happen.
So now you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. All right. So I'll start with the main file again. So with the main file again is the actual article itself. And you need to pay extra attention to the format because every journal would want your article to be in some sort of format. Okay? And I put the citation style here in a separate point because I want to emphasize how important it is. So you've all written assignments and stuff, and you had to cite your sources. And you probably already know how annoying it is to make sure everything is cited properly and the formatting of the citation, the bibliography is all done very well, right? So it's also equally annoying for the editor to go back and make sure you've done everything properly. So they will tell you that if you want to expedite the review process, you have to pay attention to the formatting. So it's always a good idea while you're typing to make sure everything is formatted properly to save yourself time. And you already probably know of some citation managers like EndNote or Mendeley and all that stuff. Use them, they will help you a lot. And make sure you follow the requirements of the journal. Then there are other documents. These could be supplementary files. Maybe that you have some data or procedures you don't want to include in the actual paper that will be published. So you put it in a separate file. Sometimes the journals will ask you to submit figures separately from the main body of the article. Sometimes they will ask you for a copyright license or a publication agreement. Okay? So these are the 3 files that you have to submit. So I've been an author, I've published, I've also been an editor, and I've also been a reviewer. So I've made mistakes and I've seen other mistakes. So hopefully I have some tips that I can give to you so you don't make the same mistakes that I've made and I've seen other people make. Perhaps the most important one is to know your audience. And I see this a lot with undergraduate students, and I used to make the same mistake again because you think everyone, you spend so many months working in a lab, you talk to your supervisor, you talk to, when I say lab, I mean like research unit. I work in a lab, so I'm thinking lab again. I don't know my audience apparently. So you're working with a research group and you're always communicating with them. They know what you're thinking, you know what they're thinking. So when you talk with each other, it's different from talking to someone else who has no idea what you're doing, who has never worked with you before. They might know the field, but they don't know your work. So whenever you're writing, keep in mind you're no longer writing an assignment for a class. You're writing for a not necessarily the general public, but for someone else who doesn't know the things you know. So you go to a poster presentation and you see a nice poster, you ask the student to present to you and they start talking and saying stuff that you have no idea what they are. They know it obviously very well, but they didn't take into account your background. And you just stand there I'm like, okay, thanks for the effort, and you move on, unfortunately. Don't do that mistake. Always, always know your audience. This is very, very important. Okay. The second thing is the clarity. Always have a big picture in mind. Before I start writing, I always have a piece of paper with me and I put doodles. I say, okay, I want to talk about this first, and then I'm going to transition here because this is the general theme. And as cheesy as it might sound, have a purpose for the paper. You might think this is very obvious, but actually is very, very, very helpful. Always ask yourself, why am I writing this paper? Why am I writing this part? Why am I writing this part? Because in your head, it will create a story, and always aim towards telling a story. Because when you tell a story and there's a logical flow to it, anyone out there can easily follow it and will understand why you're doing the things you're doing. So a few days ago, I had my committee meeting for my PhD. It was an important meeting for me because I had to, because that's the meeting that will determine if I have to still work in the lab or if I'm actually done and now I've done enough and I can focus on writing my thesis. So I thought I have two options. I can give my committee all my results. I've been working for years on my PhD and I have all this data. I can just toss them there, or I can ignore some data and focus on telling a story. And that's what I did. I ignored more than half of the stuff that I've done over the years I spent doing my PhD, and I focused on the very, very important highlights, and I put them in a logical order. It wasn't the same order I did the experiments in, but I put them in a logical order. So I said, first, I did this, I had these problems, so I transitioned to this. I solved the problem, so I decided to do this, and so on and so on. And by the end of the presentation, I had only 3 questions. And everyone else said, perfect, that's it, we understand it, good to go. Always aim for telling a story. Guide the people through the process that you went through. And it will make the article very smooth and much easier to read. Something else I like to do is to wait and reread. So I type something, I finish it, I don't review it right away. I wait for a few days to try and kind of forget what I wrote, and then I come back and read it again. And I always, always spot so many mistakes because when you're typing, sometimes you might do it, I do it, I'm not sure if you do it too or not. You're typing and then you realize some of the words that you were thinking of, you didn't type them because you're thinking so fast, the thought is here, but what's coming out is a bit different. Half of it is on the paper, half of it is still stuck in your head. And you don't realize that because you're in a zone. And then when you remove yourself from that zone and you come back and realize, yeah, no, this doesn't make any sense. I didn't put this part here. I didn't put this part here. It's very, very helpful. So give it a shot. Even you can go back and read essays you've written in the past and you will realize, oh my God, who wrote this? Why did I do this? Because it gives you a different perspective. So this is very helpful. It is very helpful for me for sure. And the last thing here is to predict the questions. So whenever I write or whenever I'm giving a lecture or something like that, I always try to ask myself, okay, what are the students going to ask me? So do I want to put it in the slide already, or am I going to predict the questions and then have them ready? And then when I go to the lecture, give the lecture, they ask the questions I predicted, and I already have an answer prepared. Do that with the peer review, with the article. Think, okay, what would the reviewer say? The reviewer wasn't with me in the lab. The reviewer is going to read this and they're going to think about so and so and so. Okay, how can I write and answer these questions at the same time? So again, going back to knowing your audience. This will save you some time because when it comes to the peer review process, maybe you've already did some of the work already, so that you don't have to answer their questions because you already answered them. We will talk more about the peer review process in a bit. ask colleagues to review your paper. So me and my supervisor, we, like a month ago or so, we wrote an article proposing a treatment for HIV. We're not virologists. Me and my supervisor, we are hardcore immunologists. So we gave our article, after we finished writing it, we gave it to scientists in our research cluster who are virologists who work on HIV. And the people we gave it to 2 people, and they both gave us very valuable feedback. We kind of ended up having to rewrite the whole thing, taking their comments into account. So it's very, very helpful to ask colleagues for help. So when you write something, maybe ask grad students in your lab to proofread it for you and see if it makes sense to them. The last tip, am I going too fast or is the speed okay? If I'm going too fast, send a message or something and let me know to slow down.
It's perfect. You're
Okay,
doing great.
Awesome. The last tip I want to give you is be honest with yourself. And what do I mean by that? You've done research, it's your baby, it's your project, you're so proud of it, and you're so excited, and you put all that excitement into the paper and accidentally make amazing conclusions that you actually didn't really justify very well. Nothing bothers the reviewers more than conclusions like this, unfortunately, and it happens way more than you think. So always know the limitations of your study, and every study has lots and lots of limitations. Okay, so whenever you try to draw conclusions, keep these limitations in mind, because you will know that the conclusion you've drawn is also limited by the limitations of your study. So I'll give you an example. So I told you I've been a reviewer, and I'll use an example from a paper that I reviewed, and I tried to anonymize it as much as possible. So hopefully you'll have no idea what you're looking at. And just a heads up, it's a lot of science, but I've tried to simplify it so much. So hopefully you just see the logic in it. And that's all that matters. You don't need to understand anything. If you're still confused at the end of it, don't worry about it. Who cares? Anyway, so some science. There is a treatment, doesn't matter what it is, let's call it treatment A. If you use it on cells, let's call them X. These cells go from being X to being Y. These cells Y are important for various reasons. So this is a graph from the paper that the authors submitted. Here you can see with no treatment, you don't have many cells that are Y. They are still X. When you give the treatment, more cells become Y. Makes sense. Okay, exactly what the science says. You put the treatment A, you get more cells that are Y. Beautiful. Now, there are many other people who have studied cells Y because they are important in the field of immunology. And when cells, it turns out, when cells become Y, there's a gene in there, they just make less of it. Okay? And when they make less of it, those cells that are called Y, they start behaving in a certain way. Okay? So you have cells X, cells Y. Cells Y are important. Cells X, useless. Cells X make a lot of gene. Cells Y make less of this gene, and that makes them have a different behavior, gives them a different behavior. Okay, we already know this. This is nothing new. This is not what the authors were saying. The authors and all of us out there know this already. But then the reviewers made a very interesting statement. They said their treatment A, made cells Y express even lower of this gene of interest. And they said that their treatment is making cells Y even more potent. So not only do they express little of that gene, they are expressing even lower amounts. So the cells are even more potent. So that's interesting. This actually can revolutionize the field and we can use it for therapy and all that stuff. Amazing. One of the strongest conclusions they've made. And then you look at the results. So you're looking at the amount of gene being made. Before the treatment, you have this much. After the treatment, it goes down. Well, that's amazing. That's exactly what they were saying, right? Everything makes sense. But here's the problem. You look at how they did the experiments and it all falls apart, unfortunately. So when I was saying all of this with X and Y and all that stuff, I told you that the authors, so I'll go back here to the statement, they said treatment A makes cells Y make lower amount of gene. So how would you test this? You would take Y without treatment and you see how much gene is being made. You give them the treatment and you see if gene goes even further down, right? They didn't do that. What they did is they took X and they looked at how much gene is there. They added the treatment and then they looked at how much gene was there. But we already know gene will go down when you give the treatment. You're not looking at Y anymore. You're looking at a different population of cells. Their conclusion is completely inappropriate, has nothing to do with the data. So as a reviewer, you might not know this, but reviewers get 2 boxes to type in comments. One box will send the comments to the authors and the editor, and there is one box that is a private communication between the reviewer and the editor. So I sent a message to the editor and said, this experiment, they did it, they did it incorrectly, actually, and the conclusion they are drawing is completely inappropriate. This is not suitable for publication. And the editor pointed that out to them. So nothing upsets a reviewer more than a conclusion that is not appropriate and not justified by the data. So always be careful when you're making conclusions in your paper, and always be on the lookout for other potential explanations. Okay? Before we get to peer review, any questions? And I'll look at the chat here maybe.
I can watch the chat for you, Ghassan, and then I will tell you the questions orally.
All right, that works for me. Everything makes sense so far?
Looks good from what I can see. I see no questions in the chat box at the moment, but they're probably thinking. Keep on going.
Sounds good. Peer review. So there are 3 aspects to the peer review. First, there's a decision to be made whether your article will be sent for peer review or not. And then there is a part where the second part is if it's sent to peer review, you will receive the reviewer comments and now you have to respond to them. And then the last part is the decision, whether your response is appropriate or not, and that kind of stuff. So before we get deeper into peer review, there are some misconceptions that I think we should clear up first. The first one is you have to do what the reviewer wants. That actually isn't the case. You don't have to do everything the reviewer wants. The second one is it's up to the reviewer whether the article is accepted or rejected. It isn't up to the reviewer. It's actually up to the editor, but we'll talk more about it. The third misconception is you receive comments, you make the changes in the document, and then you send the document back, and that is it. That's the peer review process. That's actually not the case. Okay, so again, we'll talk more about it. So some general rules for when you're responding to reviewers. Always be diplomatic and polite. Don't try and pick a fight with a reviewer. It's not going to take you anywhere. Okay, and always thank them for their time. So it takes a lot of time to go carefully through the article, think of questions, and give feedback, right? So the authors are, the reviewers aren't just criticizing your work, they are also giving you constructive criticism. Think of this as a way to improve your article, okay? And make sure you address all the concerns. And I say address, I don't say fix, because you might not be able to. And I already told you, you don't have to do everything the reviewer tells you to do, but you have to address all the concerns. Otherwise, they might reject the paper, or you might have to go through multiple rounds of review, and that is not always a very good thing. And it will delay the publication, obviously. So you receive a comment from the reviewer, and let's say the reviewer is right. You made a mistake, or you missed something, or something needs to be changed. So you ask yourself, can I make the change? Sometimes you can't, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But if you can make the change, then acknowledge the mistake, thank the reviewer for pointing it out. Okay, so again, be polite and be diplomatic. So you can say the authors made a mistake, or we made a mistake. We thank the reviewer for pointing that out, and make the necessary changes. And tell the reviewers, so I said you don't only make changes and you submit the document back, as in like one of the misconceptions. So here is what I'm talking about. The peer review process is a discussion. The reviewers will give you a bunch of comments, and you have a discussion with them. It's not just, okay, you want me to change this? Here, I changed it. You're talking and you're explaining your thought process and trying to justify why you did the things you did, and what kind of changes you've made. So, for example, you said, thank you for pointing this out. Now we have included another figure to kind of provide an outline of how we did our study. This figure is now on page so-and-so. So you tell them where the change has been made, and you highlighted that change in the main document. So it's easier for the reviewer to just simply go back to, or find a new document that you submitted with all the changes, and quickly go to the page of interest and say, oh, okay, here's the change. I can clearly see it. You save them time, and it makes it easier for them to review your paper. Okay? Sometimes you can't make these changes, and that is completely fine. Again, it's a discussion between you and the reviewers. Some common reasons why you can't make these changes is sometimes the changes are beyond the scope of the paper. And this happened with me and my supervisor in some of the papers we wrote. The reviewer wasn't angry or upset or anything, but wanted us to discuss things that we felt if we include them, it will make the article too broad, too long, and it loses its flow. So we explained that to the reviewer, and the reviewer was happy. It's okay, it's completely reasonable. Sometimes the work can't be done. Maybe the technique or the thing the reviewer wants you to do, you can't do it because of technical limitations of your lab or research group. You just simply can't do it. So you have to explain that, but you might make some sort of compromise. Maybe you modify the text of the article a little bit and say, it would be beneficial to do so-and-so, but unfortunately, we are not able to do that at the present moment. So whoever is reading, if your article ends up being published, whoever reads it will know, they might think of, like, why didn't they use this technique? But then they will see that you've already addressed it, and you said you don't have access to that technique, and the reader will say, oh, okay, I understand. So there are some limitations. I'll keep that in mind, but I see where they're coming from. So they will be more forgiving. Conclusions. And if you're drawing inappropriate conclusions and they are too strong and haven't been justified, it's a big turnoff for scholars. So if you communicate your conclusions along with the limitations of these conclusions, it's much more forgivable, I would say. Okay. Sometimes you will disagree with the reviewers, and this is common. Okay, maybe the reviewer misunderstood something. Again, very politely, very clearly explain why the reviewer missed it or why the reviewer got that thing wrong. But this should also prompt you to think, well, why did the reviewer misunderstand what I wrote? Maybe you didn't write it in a very clear way. So either way, try to do something about it. So don't just say, I disagree and that's it. Maybe you can address it somehow. All right? And make any changes, reword, rephrase, do all these things and see if it helps make the text clearer. And the reviewer will appreciate that. Okay? So for the article that I told you about with the inappropriate conclusions, the editor sent our conclusions, our comments. So there were 3 of us reviewing the paper. And unfortunately, the reviewer, the authors didn't address them very well. They tried to address some of our concerns that was a bit inadequate, but also they completely ignored some of our comments. They did not address them at all. And me and the other reviewers were very upset with that. And the article was rejected. So don't do that. Address all the concerns to the best of your ability. You don't have to agree, but do your best. One misconception I talked about was it's not up to the reviewer whether the article is rejected or not. The reviewer makes a recommendation. The person who makes the decision is the editor. Okay? And there is usually more than one, more than two reviewers reviewing your work. And then the editor will read all the comments and they will make the decision based on what you have been saying in the peer review process and your address or the way you addressed the comments and what the reviewers think. So in the first ever article I published, I was 3rd author, so I wasn't too involved in responding to reviewers. Sorry, I was 3rd author, and I wasn't like heavily involved in the peer review. The first author was chatting with the reviewers. And I was reading the comments, and 2 out of the 3 reviewers were happy. The 3rd reviewer was extremely unhappy, but they weren't being very reasonable. So the editor said, you know what? I'm very happy with all the changes that are made, and you seem to have addressed everything reasonably, and our article ended up being published. So even though we didn't please everyone, and you don't have to please everyone, we did what was reasonable, and the editor was happy. So again, it is up to the editor, but do your best. Okay? Any questions about the peer review process? You've probably already heard of the blind review, double blind, all that stuff, maybe?
Usually this sure participants are all over the map. Brianne says yes, she has definitely heard about peer review process. Ghassan, we're wondering, where sometimes your audio was cutting out a little bit, we're wondering, can you turn off your video as you finish the rest, and then all of your bandwidth will go towards your audio? And not that we don't love to see you, but that way it won't cut in and out perhaps.
Oh, sorry, what do you want me to do?
Can you turn off your video?
Can I turn off my video? Oh,
yeah, so as you put your mouse over top, where yeah, there.
Pause, stop sharing, annotate, chat.
Nope, we still want you to share your presentation. That part was fine. What happens is that if you run your mouse over the WebEx screen, there'll be a mute button and a video button. There we go, perfect. And then you can go, there we go, all set. Thanks so much, Ghassan. Yep.
No
great.
problem. Well, I'm almost done, but hey, it's okay. No worries. All right. Can you okay?
Yes, we sure can. Go ahead.
Sounds good. So now the first 3 steps are done. The first 3 steps are the hardest part. If you've survived so far, you are in good shape and congratulations. So after the peer review, copy editing begins. What is copy editing? The editor and the editorial board of the journal will carefully read your article and proofread it, sure the grammar is okay and all that stuff is okay, and the formatting of the figures and all the little details, everything is in good shape. Okay, they do that, you don't have to worry about it. And then something called production. So the production is there are special editors in the journal who will take the Word document that you submitted and they will format it into a PDF that looks professional like this. Okay, so I didn't do any of that. I sent a simple Word file and then they all put it into this beautiful format. This is called the proof. It will be sent to you. Okay, you will have 48 hours to make the changes. Okay, because sometimes they will change a few things here and there. Sometimes they will make some figures bigger or smaller. So carefully read everything. Make sure they typed your name correctly. Make sure they have your email correctly. Make sure everything is done properly. You will have 2 days, go over it, and then let the editors know. Many journals use this thing called the query system. They will send you a PDF with a bunch of queries. There will a bunch of comments saying, okay, query number 1, make sure your name is correct. On page 4, line so and so, make sure the abbreviation is appropriate. These kind of things. So make sure you address all of these things. Again, you only have 2 days. You do this, and then you submit it. And if everything goes well, you publish. Okay? And I am done. And now the floor is Liv's. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
That was fantastic. So if Ghassan can stop sharing his screen, there'll be a button up at the top.
There you go.
Perfect. And then Liv will be able to do hers.
Okay, I think I'm doing this.
You are.
Did it work?
Yes, it sure did. You just got to start your presentation and you are good to go.
Okay, I think I'm going to turn off, while I'm introducing myself, I'll keep my video on, but if people are having audio issues, I guess the problem would be on my end more than anything, but I can turn off my audio.
No,
I just
video.
don't know how to do it now. Now that I'm sharing my screen, I'm confused as to how to do it. Oh, here we go.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Liv Marken. I'm going to share my contact information in the chat once I'm done. But please feel free to interrupt with questions at any time, and I'm going to rely on Merle to interrupt me if there's any issues or if there's any questions as I go along. So I'm the Writing Centre coordinator, but I work very closely with Ghassan on the Undergraduate Research Journal, and I've been doing that since about 2013. And the Writing Centre involvement with the journal has worked out really well. A few universities have that model, including Purdue University, because Writing Centre professionals and student tutors can really help students prepare things for publication, and they can help student editors learn how to do the editing and proofreading and that kind of thing when it comes to journal articles. So it's a really nice fit, and I really enjoy working with undergraduate researchers, whether they're editors or authors. So I'm going to cover mainly what are called higher order concerns. So in writing studies, we talk about higher order concerns versus lower order concerns. And I know that a lot of us are perfectionists, high achievers. I don't know if you see yourself in that particular category, but I know that when I look at a draft, I tend to get hung up on correctness. So I'll crawl through my paper one sentence at a time, looking for punctuation mistakes, problems with citations, grammar, that kind of thing, rather than first focusing on higher order concerns. So there's really not a lot of point dumping a bunch of energy into spelling and grammar if in the higher order concern level of revision and editing, you end up cutting a paragraph or changing it around, you've wasted that time on proofreading a particular paragraph that's not used. So I would recommend, as you're approaching the possibly overwhelming project of revising a paper for publication, that you focus on these higher order concerns. And the very first thing I would encourage you to focus on are the ethical considerations. So if you've used tables, charts, graphs, images, do you have copyright permission? Is there any conflict of interest in what you're doing? Have you inadvertently plagiarized? So oftentimes when we're paraphrasing a lot, especially in science and social sciences, it can be easy to accidentally plagiarize, and don't feel ashamed about that. It's something that happens a lot, especially when we're learning, we're students. Definitely use the Writing Centre. We can help you to make sure that your paraphrasing is done properly. Maybe there are privacy or ethics concerns. Do you have ethics approval if you've written about animal or human subjects? Maybe your approval doesn't allow you to publish your findings or only publish parts of your findings. Are you using language bias? And we can help with that as well as with the Language Centre. If you're using APA, they have a really good, their new edition has really good information about that. And have you informed any co-authors or co-investigators? So I'm going to focus on the rest of that list as much as I can in the time that I have left. So I'm going to go through pretty quickly, but when I share these slides, know that I've got some speaking notes. Some of those slides are more text heavy than I normally would use because I knew that I didn't have a lot of time for this section. So you can go through those and definitely contact me if you have any questions. The best way to improve your writing is to work one-on-one with somebody, specifically with somebody in your field. If you have that mentorship from a professor or a grad student, they can be an amazing resource. We also have tutors at the Writing Centre from across the disciplines. So I have a few science tutors, I have social sciences, students from social sciences, humanities. So whatever area you're working in, I can pair you with somebody and you can work in that way. I'm just realizing that I can make.
Can you put it, thanks, I was just going to interrupt on that one.
Okay, I don't even know how to do it.
Yeah, if you can put it on full screen, should be under
view,
present. Sure, present. There you go. That'll work. Thanks so much.
Okay. Okay. All right. So a lot of times with USURJ, what we see is that a student has written a paper for a course, and they submit the paper that they got an A+ on, or 95%, and the prof said, this is amazing, you should submit it to a journal. They submit it to USURJ, and what we notice as editors is that the paper hasn't really been adjusted for a new audience. So when you write a paper for a class, a lot of the terminology is known between you and the professor. The way that the assignment is contextualized is for that particular class. And so I'm going to give you some advice about how to shift that a little bit. So have somebody from outside the discipline read it and flag where they got lost. Where did terms need more explanation, for example. You also can use reporter's questions, such as to force yourself to explain things a little bit. You know, just the simple who, what, when, where, why. And I think a really important one is so what? Why should the reader care? So for example, you might write something about, you know, using such and such framework, I assessed a public health pamphlet on vaccines for readability and clarity. So you did this project of assessing these pamphlets. So what? Why did you do it? What are the implications of your analysis? It may seem obvious to you, but the meaningfulness of what you did must be articulated in a clear way, especially at the outset. For the third bullet there, how does the research connect to a widespread concern or a wider significance, and why should the reader care? I have one example in these speaking notes for that, so I'll just let you have a look at that on your own, and just in the interest of time. So some ways to be more clear and concise. I'm going to talk about the old new information pattern. Sometimes it's talked about as the known new information pattern or information contract. I'm going to talk about sentence variety very briefly, talk about verbs and nouns, and I don't fall asleep when we get into the parts of speech and grammar, but as well as with pronouns, but I'm going to be very basic in the way that I explain these things. And I'm going to talk to you about something called what I call the symptom check. It's kind of like taking the temperature of your draft for common symptoms of wordiness. So to me, that particular trick really helped me as a student and actually catches a lot of the other problems. So we'll talk about that as well. And then I'll give you a resource for common phrases and transitions that are used in writing. So we'll get right into it here. And it's not. Okay, so with the old new information pattern, if you think of your writing between sentences and paragraphs like a chain, like links in a chain, those connections may be obvious to you because you're familiar with the material, but not to others. So you want to check that you're doing what's called the old new information pattern. When I learned this, it really improved my writing, and it made even things more clear to myself when I was trying to explain things. So here's an example of a poorly done series of 3 sentences that aren't really connected because new information is introduced at the beginning of each sentence. So for the first sentence, we try to provide optimal growing conditions for crops by using soil additives to adjust soil pH. And then the next sentence starts all of a sudden with garden lime, but the pH is mentioned at the end of the sentence. So if you can reorder things sometimes to take what's toward the end of a sentence, at the beginning of the next sentence, hook it in. So if you rearrange the order, that way the reader can see those links in the chains even better. And then again, in that third sentence, you're introducing new information as well. So here's a better example. So you have the old information, the new information in the first sentence, followed by old information near the beginning of the second sentence, where we talk about soil pH, and then the words agricultural limestone are repeated at the end and the beginning of the final 2 sentences. You may feel like you're repeating yourself or you're being overly repetitive. It's better to do that to create coherence than it is to constantly be changing terminology and changing what appears to be changing the subject to somebody from outside the project. Here's an example from a history paper, because we tend to focus quite a bit on sciences and social sciences. But so here's an example I found from a paper where there's a really nice transition work done, where that old new information pattern is done really beautifully. So you can use sort of synonyms or other ways of explaining what you've done. So for example, in red, it says shed a famous tear, and in the next sentence, the old information is the image of a crying Indian. And at the end of that sentence, you have somebody's monograph mentioned. And then at the beginning of the next sentence, the words his work are used. And at the end of that sentence, another work is introduced. And we have the words in it, and then that person's name mentioned in the beginning of the next sentence. Now, you don't always have to write like that, but if you're wanting to boost how clear you're being, using this particular method can really help. And it's something that you can start to move away a little bit from always using transitional expressions like furthermore, furthermore, moreover. We tend to just repeat that all the time, but this actually is a way that you can also reinforce that particular need to make a transition. So that's old new information pattern. Sentence variety. If you read something good, back up and don't just think about the content, but think about why is it good. And what you might notice is that it's got a natural flow. That flow is not something mystical or creative, it is technical. And so what you're seeing is a seemingly random mixture, and the writer might not even know that they're doing this, but between short, medium, and long sentences. So you'll have all of a sudden a shorter sentence amongst some medium and long sentences that creates a feeling of, breaks the feeling of monotony and creates a more natural, not conversational, but just a more natural form of communication. It feels less robotic. On a more technical level, you have our workshops on sentence types. You have 3 types of sentence in English. It's a complicated language, but there are only 3 sentence types. And if we can vary those types of sentences, grammatical structures, that can help with sentence variety and with clarity as well. We're better showing connections between ideas. Here's an example of short, medium, long. So the kind of peach colored highlighting is we have medium sentences. We have shorter sentences with the green and long sentences with the blue. So we're not going to read through that. But the third thing I was going to talk about are zombie nouns. They're also called nominalizations. And there's a very good book by Helen Sword called The Writer's Diet. It's a skinny little book. And I highly recommend buying it or taking it out from the library now that we can take books out from the library. And excuse me, I'm not used to presenting anymore. I'm used to being by myself all the time. So some common endings if you're looking for these words. You're using nouns all the time, but you can promote them to verbs. So you can turn your nouns into action words to make your writing more clear. So here's an example, some examples. So if you have a verb, try to use the verb instead of the noun. So you might write something like, this has an effect on X. You could add more concise and more powerful is, this affects that. Another one would be, this has applicability for X. You could say, this applies to X. Why is that better? Well, it makes it more concise, but it also energizes your writing. I can't remember who said this, but I'll have to find out who it is. But they said that the verb is the engine of your sentence. It makes it go. If you have strong verbs in your writing, you're going to be more clear. Unclear pronouns. So I think we're all familiar with this, and we've all had a prof circle the word this or it at the beginning of a sentence. This is a pronoun. So pronouns replace nouns, and they help us to avoid being repetitive all the time. So if we're saying, if we're referring to John, 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 we can say he or him. The pronoun replaces the noun so that we're not being repetitive all the time. But we can lose that context when we start a new sentence. You can just repeat the word, or you can use a pronoun plus a description of what it was you just talked about. So there's an example for you of that, and I can send you more information if you're struggling with this issue and you want some more information about how to avoid unclear pronoun references. Any questions so far? I think I'm almost done. How are we for time?
You're doing good, Liv. Just keep on
Yeah,
going.
it's already 12 o'clock, so if people have to leave, that's okay. But yeah, I'll keep going. So this is my favorite one. When I was in first year university, I wrote an essay, and I wanted to do really well on my English essay because that's what I ended up majoring in. So I showed this to my prof, and he read the first couple of pages, and he took a Post-it note and he wrote down these words that are listed here on the Post-it note. And he said, put this on your computer monitor. And every time, and do a little word search when you write a full draft. So write the draft, don't worry about what it sounds like. First drafts are supposed to be ugly. But if you want to write more clearly, more concisely, hit Control F and just start from the top here. I usually start with the word that seems to be the worst offender, and then go to be. So all of the verbs of existence, I call them. So is, we see that a lot in our writing. These are perfectly good words. We need these words, but they're symptoms. So they're not the words themselves aren't the problem. It's that they indicate that there's a problem. So it's kind of like taking a temperature and finding a fever. The fever isn't the issue, the illness is the issue. So sorry about the illness talk. I know we're all sick of that these days. So if you look for these words, you will find clusters or little hotspots in your writing where you could be a little bit more concise. So for example, if you find the word that, you could replace the phrase due to the fact that with the word because. So one word substitution for 5 words due to the fact that. Another one is of. So of the we tend to use when we're trying to avoid deciding where to put the apostrophe for possession. So voice of the speaker, we could change to the speaker's voice. And so doing this check again of these words will catch a lot of what I was talking about before. Here's an example. So you can try this out on your own. I don't think we have time to do this as an activity, but here we have quite a few of those words. So this is the young woman who was elected to be president by the group. So I've highlighted is, who, was, to be, and by. So if I find this in my writing, I'll know as a writing professional or as somebody who's learned about this that there's a problem of passive voice, which we use a lot in the sciences and social sciences, and that's fine. So you can't always revise. You know, the trend now is toward using active voice, but you in science and social sciences, you might want to talk to your supervisor about that. But if you find passive voice, that just means the doer of the action, which is the group, is de-emphasized or not included at all. So one quick way to fix this is to put the group first. So if you know that issue, you can correct that way. But if you're just doing Control F, you might find this sentence light up like a Christmas tree and you think, okay, it needs some work. And you might be stuck. You might imagine, I don't know how to change it. This is how I wrote it and I can't imagine it any other way. Don't be afraid to tackle your sentences and switch the order around or to cut out words altogether. Play around with the sentences. Don't be rigid about it. So for this one, you could revise it. You can cut it down by half if you do the final revision. The group elected this young woman president. So here you flipped it around so that the group is doing the action rather than receiving the action. Here's another one. There are. So try not to start sentences with there are or there is, because you'll back yourself into a corner of wordiness. There are 25 students who have already expressed desire. It is, there are, it is, same problem. So if you just start with the subject of the sentence rather than there are, everything kind of clicks into place. Now you'll see that this revision has words that are on my hit list, the Control F hit list, such as have, and by. But that's okay. It's just a matter of kind of taking the temperature, seeing if these words are being used a lot, and seeing if you can revise to kind of use that evidence of wordiness to do some revisions. Finally, some common phrases and transitions. There's something called the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank. It's amazing. So we often get into these habits of writing where we're always using the same language. One thing that Ghassan talked about was notice how other people do things. So if you read something good or you're reading something in your field, you're usually reading it for content. So I'm trying to understand this content. Another way of reading is how does it work? So English majors are good at this. Historians are good at this, Merle. Backing up and looking at it and saying, how is this thing made? So I'm reading this article. What words do they use? Why is it clear? Why is it bad? Why is it poorly written? And so start thinking about, oh, Ghassan's talked about this before, like seeing a neat word that somebody used, like a verb, just deciding, I'm going to use that in my writing. That's something that you can start to collect. This phrase bank has all kinds of different ways of explaining things. So it links there. So when we send our slides, you can link to it. And there's also a link to a handbook of transitions. But here's an example from that page. So the little arrow on the left-hand side is just one example of showing how something causes something. So it will just give you, if you scroll down, there's a whole list of ways that you can explain how something happened. Or further on that menu. So the menu going across the top, broader categories, and then general language functions are on the left menu on the left column. So that's a pretty good source. My final writing tip, this is all hard work. Writing is hard work and revising is hard work. You get better at it over time. You start to learn your own writing and where you need to do work. You're not committing every crime there is to commit in the English language. You've got a handful and you're going to work on those. And as you go through and learn how to write, you're going to learn how to do more things, how to improve your writing even more. And it's one of those things where the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. I'm learning new things all the time, and studying writing is my profession. One thing I would recommend you do if you've got a supervisor or grad student you can talk to, ask them how they improved their writing. Sometimes we think that they've arrived fully formed geniuses and know how to write in their fields. No, they had definitely had struggles with writing, and they have interesting processes as well. Everybody's sort of got a different process. So learn from that and study them and how they've succeeded. And finally, take breaks. That's what I've shown this young person walking through the woods. When you take breaks, think about the word revise or revision. It means to see again. And so if you want to look at something with fresh eyes, you need to put it away for a while and come back. And if that doesn't work, if you still can't achieve that separation from what you've written, have somebody else read it aloud, talk to us at the Writing Centre, get some feedback, and definitely don't wait till the last minute. Spread that work of revision out over time if you're submitting for something like publication. So I hope that these tips have helped you in addressing those primary concerns when you begin to revise. Those lower order concerns like grammar and that kind of thing, we can help you with that as well. So do what you can on your own, but definitely get help along the way. Don't do it alone. Some resources here. The Writing Centre, there's my contact information, the link to the Writing Centre where you can have an email consultation with a tutor. I will match you with a tutor who's just right for your particular submission. And appointment booking. Be sure to read the biographies of the tutors so that you know who's a good fit for you. And if the appointment times don't work, we can sort out a different appointment time with that tutor. It's no problem. Look at the existing literature in your field, see how it sounds, how it feels, steal words from it, but not phrases. And take part in conferences and poster presentations so you get used to translating what you've done for other people. Talk to your supervisor, talk to your professors, graduate students, fellow undergrads, and citation managers are thrown in here. I think Ghassan put that in there. They can really save you a lot of time. Like the library can help you with that. There are some citation management workshops, and the liaison librarian for your department can set you up with that and can help you get a citation manager working so that you can really make your creating citations for a longer paper more, you can save so much time and improve the accuracy of what you're doing. So I think that's all I have for today.
That's just amazing. Thanks, Liv. We did have a workshop on Zotero, which was recorded, and so those in the have access to the Shure website. You can go and listen to that. So that is a citation manager. It's a free one that's available. Others that people use include OneNote or Mendeley or various others. But yeah, Zotero is a free one, which is always good. Does anyone have any questions for either Liv or Ghassan? For USURJ, if you write a paper for a language class like French, do you have to translate to English before trying to publish it?
No, we actually have a French paper that we're managing right now. So far, it's really dependent on whether we have an undergraduate editor who has enough French to be able to assess whether or not it's worthy to go to review. So this year we were fortunate enough to have somebody in the humanities section for a French literature paper. I think we don't have a lot of French professors, so it's sometimes difficult to find a reviewer. So the process can take a little longer if we need to go outside the University of Saskatchewan to find a reviewer. But definitely contact us first before you submit, and we can really make our best effort to work something out.
I'm going to stop the recording, but please continue with the chat.